Hey guys, this is Mocha Boy from RCGroups, and we're gonna do a setup video today. I'm gonna try to walk through the steps for downloading MPNG, Megapirate NG, and getting installed on a Crius All-in-One Pro flight controller. I'm actually in the middle of a new build, so this works out pretty well for being able to go through the entire setup process and see if it all still works the way that I think it does. So I haven't really had a chance to rehearse any of this. We're just going to go off the cuff and see how far we get. So there are a couple of tools that we're going to need. There are a number of different ways to get at the code, and I'm going to show you 3 of them. But the tools that we're going to need the Arduino SDK, and that's going to be version 1.03. We're going to need the source code as well, and then we're going to need a way to get the source code onto our system. It's checked into a code repository right now, and we want to make sure that we check that out and onto our systems, but I'll show you how to do that. At least I'll show you a couple of different ways to do that. So first things first, let's get Arduino set up. So that's just arduino.cc. We're going to go into the download area, and just for reference, I'm on Windows 7 as I'm doing this. So let's see, download. Okay. Now obviously if you're on a Mac, you can grab the Mac binaries, but for this we're going to be running on Windows. So this is a 91 megabyte download. I mean, this part's pretty straightforward. The earlier version I was running 1.01 and wasn't running into any issues, but it was just about time to update to the new binary anyway, so let's just wait for that download. Okay, let's show that in the folder. Just going to move this to the desktop just to make things a little bit simpler. All right, so let's get this extracted onto the desktop. Extract all, Arduino 1.03. Okay, so just to make things simpler, I'm going to grab this and pin that over onto my taskbar. Double click on the executable file. There's going to be one set of changes that I'm going to bring your attention to, but we will come back to this when we're ready to actually upload the firmware. Now, as you know, with Megapirate, we're going to be using a combination of a couple of different configuration programs. We're going to use Arduino's SDK environment to upload the firmware to the board, but we're actually going to use Mission Planner, which is available from the Ardupilot Mega site, to do the rest of the configuration. So this entire process is just to get the firmware loaded onto the board. So that setting that I mentioned earlier is going to be under File and under Preferences. This location is really important because this is where we're going to load the Arducopter port of Ardupilot Mega. We're going to be working in this set of directories, but let's take a look at that directory right now and see what's in there. It's going to be over in Documents, My Documents, and Arduino. Now, this is actually, when you install Arduino for the first time, it dumps a load of different files onto here, not to mention which, not the least of which rather, are libraries, and then some example sketch files. We're going to need to blow all of those away and download a copy of Megapirate in place of this. But you'll see how that happens in just a sec. Okay, so let's go over to, now that we've got that, let's go over and grab just another piece of software. This is something called Tortoise. And what Tortoise is it's an SVN client that, sorry, Tortoise SVN. Now, this is just one option for Windows. I'm sure there are 100 other options that you could use, but this one works pretty well. Now, this is a shell extension, so what you can do is download this, get this installed on your system. You're going to need to reboot, and when you do, your right-click context-sensitive menus are going to show the Tortoise SVN option. So you can do that. You can pause here and then just go do that offline. We're not going to do that right now. So just to show you what you should see, when you right-click over a resource, a folder, or anywhere on your system, you'll get the Tortoise SVN option. So this is what will show up after you reboot. This is the option that we're going to use to grab the file from the repository, from Google's code repository, SVN checkout. I'll show you how that works in just a sec. So now that we've got the SDK and you've got Tortoise SVN up and running, now we're going to go over to the Megapirate site and take a quick look at what's there. So back over to Google, Megapirate NG. So where we're at right now is the Megapirate NG project site on code.google.com. And let me just give you a quick tour. First thing I want to bring to your attention, obviously, is the donate button. These guys don't work for the money, obviously, but if you got a couple of spare pennies, definitely toss it towards the developers. They've done some great work here, and put this technology in the hands of mere mortals like you and I. Anyway, so you can see the summary of all of the feeds and downloads that are available, some of the latest wiki pages. Now, I actually have taken a stab at trying to write some wiki pages, but it's tricky between builds and family and everything else to get those updated. The downloads is where the official tested and released versions sit. So if you're on, I'm still on version 2.7. I skipped 2.8. Actually, excuse me, I'm on a release candidate for 2.8, and I skipped over the official release, and I'm going to go straight over to 2.9. Now, the wiki is where, hopefully somewhere in the future, I'll be able to get some documentation on here, probably link out some of these videos, these setup videos. A lot of the information is already available on the Ardupilot Mega wiki site, so, it'd be kind of silly to have to recreate all of that information since it's already been written somewhere else. So let's see. Now, obviously, if there are issues, if there are bugs and you need to report them, this is where you come and do that. Now, where we're going to actually get the link to check out is under source. Now, source is a spot that I want to spend a little bit of time talking about. If you want to see the latest code that's available, you come into source, you click on browse, you click on the trunk, and then you click on the Ardupilot branch. Now, this is, if you've downloaded this, a lot of this will look familiar to you. What you're looking at is the the release, excuse me, the R271 release, which I believe is a port of Ardupilot Mega's version 2.9 and then release candidate 5. So this is the latest version. This is what's, this was updated 4 days ago, some of these files. So this is what we're going to be downloading. Now, if you're uncomfortable with beta code potentially doing something very bad to your multi-rotor, go back to the downloads page and download, any of the tested releases, 2.7 and 2.8. Big fan of 2.8, and works a lot better. And there were a lot of other things, fixes that came in to 2.8 that addressed a lot of bugs from 2.7. So you can use either of those and you should be good. But if you're ready to run 2.9, then come over to the source, and what you're going to do is you're going to grab this link right here, megapirate.ng Google code SVN trunk. Now, if you're on a Mac, you can just do this from the command line, and you could just cut, copy, and paste SVN checkout, blah, 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 all the way to Megapirate into a working directory and, call it a day. We're going to grab this, so just Control-C to copy that, and then we're going to come back over to Documents, My Documents, Arduino. Now, again, if you had set up your Arduino SDK properly and just used all the defaults, the Arduino sketchbook folder will be in your Documents folder. So I'm going to come into here. Now, this is worth mentioning. You want to make sure that you start off with a clean directory. If you went with the default installation, you will have a libraries folder, so you're going to need to delete that first, and along with some other sketch files. So we'll delete that, and just to show you what that would look like, it would look something like this: Arduino Explorer, library, show info, maybe some example sketches. Anyway, you just want to start with a clean directory. Now, clicking on my documents, I'm going to right-click over Arduino, and then I'm going to come over to SVN Checkout. So the URL of the repository, the URL that we grabbed off of the Google Code site, and we're just going to, delete that, Control-V, paste that in, HTTP, blah, 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 and then the checkout directory, fully recursive. Just keep all of the defaults. There's nothing too crazy here, and just hit OK. So this part's going to take a little bit of time, something like 1,700 files that it's got to download. Or maybe 519 files. So actually that wasn't too bad. Okay, so great, we've got the code now. Now, one of the things you will have noticed is this little check mark. This is a Tortoise SVN convention. What that means is all of your files are up to date. Now, this is going to flip over to a red exclamation point because we're going to update one file in here. And this is a file that you're all pretty familiar with. But before we get to that, if you're new to this, just stop really quickly and take a look at the Readme file. There's a lot of really great information here that will answer, some very basic questions. So spend some time looking at that, just to get motor mappings and things like that. So the meat and potatoes, we're going to go over into Ardupilot. Now the file where all the magic happens is apm_config.h. So let's go into Ultra Edit and take a look. We're going to do a quick tour of this file, and I'm going to show you some of the basic things that you're going to be activating. And we're talking specifically about a Crius All-in-One Pro V1.1 board. Now there is a version 2 that came out from RC Timer, and of course I bought the version 1.1, and then a week later the version 2 came out. Whatever, no big deal. The version 2 board, the only difference is that it comes with some additional analog sensors, and it comes with data flash logging capabilities. Now, if you're doing tuning or waypoint missions and you want to see, log information, very useful. There's nothing fundamentally different with the way that version 2 works. It's not like it works faster or better, but it's got a couple of nifty new features. Now, if you have wireless telemetry, like a 3DR radio, then it's not an issue, because anytime you're running Mission Planner, all of that information is getting downloaded to your computer anyway, so not a big deal. But, if you aren't running telemetry and, you want to log your flights and see data, what your voltages were at, then it's a very handy thing to have. So the way that the defines work, everything starts with the command define, the parameter that you're defining, and then the value that you're setting that parameter to. So they're all separated by a space, if you see that. So define pirate sensor board. For my board, it's going to be a V1. So we'll save that. CPPM enabled. Now this is a really cool feature. If you're running something like a FreeSky TFR4-B or any other receiver that's capable of PPM or CPPM output, what that means is you can get all 8 channels off of a single wire. So it's really handy for cleaning up wiring harnesses. That's how I have all of mine set up. There are some issues with if you're going to be running gimbal setups and you're going to be maxing out the throws on all 8 channels. That's outside of the scope of this conversation, but just understand that there are some limitations with PPM. So for my setup, serial PPM enabled. So this is a new setting here. I'm just going to do enabled because I still have the 1.1 board. Oh, that's right, because there's a new PPM sum board on the V2, so that's why they have an additional parameter there. So no big deal there. Now, your TX channel setup, if this is one of those settings that you're going to have to play around with. If you see weird stick inputs, come back in and reset these. I've started out with when I wasn't running PPM, I had TX multi-Wii layout, and that mapped perfectly from my Futaba over into Mission Planner. When I switched over into CPPM, however, those mappings went away, things were out of whack, and I had to switch over to standard, which is obvious here because this is standard PPM layout. Anyway, okay, so that's that. Now for your barometric pressure sensor, this stays as the default. Let's just make sure that's right. Copter LEDs enabled. This actually does a couple of different things because we repurpose, or at least I've seen a lot of people repurpose some of the output pins to do things like output a sound to a piezo speaker, or a piezo buzzer, or flip LEDs on and off. You can keep this on as enabled, that's fine. Max sonar range, I'm not running sonar. I've seen this set to 200. I don't know why it's at 400 right now, but we'll just leave that alone. Now for define Osd Protocol, I'm using a U-Blocks. I'm sorry, I'm going to be using a MinimOSD board. Now, I'm told that this can be Osd Protocol none. I'm going to switch this over to RimZB for right now, only because that's what I have working on my other setup. So obviously if I run into problems, I can always come back and change that out. But this is a setting that I have set on another rig, and it works for MinimOSD. Okay, so for GPS protocol, I'm running a U-Blocks. So let's grab that parameter, and that's the Crius CN-06 GPS board. If you've got a MediaTek board, I believe that's the MTK16. And I can let you play with this depending on what GPS settings you have. Now for serial board, a serial baud. So let's talk about these. When on the Crius board, I'll reference this in another video. Over on the serial ports, there's 3 sets of ports, and each one of them has a transmit and receive. So serial 0 is typically where you would drop your a Bluetooth component. Serial 2 would be your GPS, and serial 3 would be your 3DR or telemetry. For the most part, you can keep these settings at their defaults, but let's say, for instance, you wanted to plug Bluetooth in to serial 0. There's a couple of different ways that I'm going to be doing this. I'm probably going to just flip it over into the FTDI port, but from what I understand, you can connect it into serial 0, and the only change that you'll have to make is to just change this baud rate to 9600. And this is especially if you're using the RC Timers Bluetooth module. So we're going to leave that at 9600, keep 38400 for the GPS port, and 57K for 3DR. Now this may change, but I'm just going to leave those for right now. Now for frame, if you're running an X quad, if you're running a quad, you have the option of a plus or an X. So in this particular case, I'm running a tri in this, but no big deal. If you're most of us are running quads, you just type in quad frame there. Tri frame. Now, if you are running a quad, you just have to, you might be running a D'Alfonso, or well, I'm sorry, not a D'Alfonso, a V frame, like a V octa. Those are just crazy setups, but typically most of us will be running X frames. There are rare occasions where people are running plus configurations where the motor's out, one motor's out in front instead of 2. All right, so for channel 7 options, we're not going to do anything with these, but channel 7 is something that you can configure to do some additional flight modes. You can flick channel 7 to do return to launch. There's a new feature in Ardupilot 2.9 where you can trim using some automatic features. It's too complicated to go into here, but I believe that's what some of these settings can do. Save a waypoint, fire off a trigger for a camera. Now, inertial navigation enabled. Now, this is one of the new features in 2.1. What they did was they added the accelerometer measurements into the PID control loops. That's just a very fancy way of saying they improve things like loiter and altitude hold and position hold. They're not just relying on GPS or pressure sensors, to find out where they're headed or how high they are. they're using the accelerometers to actually tell when it's moving. And if you have an iPhone, you know how accurate those accelerometers work. I've heard really great things about that technology, and it seems to be working well across a lot of different setups. All right, so I mean, that's pretty much it. And once you get to that point, you just go ahead and hit save, and you're ready to rock. So I'm going to close this up. Now, yeah, as I mentioned earlier, now that we've made a change, this is something that's out of sync with the repository, so that's why you get the exclamation point. It's nothing to worry about. All right, so we're looking good. Now that we're done with that, we're going to come back over into the Arduino SDK. And I'm doing this off screen, but what I'm doing is I'm grabbing my flight controller and I'm plugging in the USB cable into the mini USB port. Of course, that's the wrong cable. Again, as I mentioned before in one of my other setup videos, when you plug your flight controller in, plug the cable into the flight controller first, and then plug the cable into the computer. If you don't do that, you run the risk of having the current arc from your USB cable to the board and shorting something out. I've actually had that happen a couple times now, and it took me a while to figure out why that was happening. So yeah, USB cable into the flight controller first, then into the computer. So plug that in. All right, so we've got the board plugged in to the computer, and that's going to be on COM7. Loaded Arduino SDK, and we're going to get this configured with the sketch. So the first thing we have to do is load the Ardupilot sketch. And what we're going to do is, hang on a second, let me just move some stuff around here and move over into File. Now, if you drop the files in the right place, and again, that's My Computer, Documents, My Documents, Arduino, and this is what the library structure, the folder structure should look like. Ardupilot main folder there, then libraries, and then tools. So assuming all of that is in place, when you come in and load up your SDK, under Sketchbook, you should see Ardupilot. That should just pop up. So before we do that, though, just a couple of quick things. Actually, no, we can move right into that. So we're going to load the Ardupilot sketch. Now, coincidentally, if you didn't have to use Ultra Edit or your text edit to update that apmconfig.h file, you can do it from within the SDK as well. So I'm just going to take a look at this and make sure that everything took the way it's supposed to. RemZB, sonar, LED, protocol U blocks, set the serial baud, tri-frame. If you're using a tri-frame, by the way, and this is set to X-frame, don't worry about it. The system's going to ignore the application's going to ignore that parameter anyway. All right, so we're all set. The last thing we have to do is come over into Tools. We have to check 3 settings. The board you need to have set to Arduino Mega 2560. Serial port obviously is going to be whatever serial port your USB is connected into. In my case, it's going to be COM7. And the last thing you want to do, I'm going on memory here, we may not actually need this, but you're going to set your programmer as Arduino as the in-systems programmer. Okay, so we'll leave that set, and down here over in the bottom right, you can just double check your settings, Arduino Mega 2560, COM7, and you're ready to flash at this point. So 2 buttons here, this is verify, and this is verify and upload. So first thing we're going to do is just verify everything, make sure that there's no issues. Now if you didn't, this is usually one of the places where people get tripped up. If you didn't move your libraries around, or excuse me, if you didn't start with a fresh folder and you copied libraries over libraries, you might see some compile errors here. Or if you're running just a weird setup, if you run into those problems, sometimes the easiest thing to do is to just go in, delete everything, delete your setup, reinstall everything so that it's fresh. Use all of the defaults so everything's going where it's supposed to, and then try again. So we got a good compile on that. That means this is ready to move up to the flight controller, and the actual upload process is actually going to take a few moments as well. So nice time to take a step away from your computer and go grab a drink. Great. So that upload finished. Fantastic. Good. Okay. So now that's all set up, there's one last piece to the puzzle. We're going to go and confirm that everything is actually set up the way it's supposed to be, and that the board is responding. So I'm going to close down the SDK, and now we're going to flip over to a third site. We're going to go to Ardupilot Mega. I forget the exact name of the site. Okay, great. So this is the official Arduplane repository. What we're going to grab is a copy of Mission Planner. So come over into the download section, and let's see, what version are they up to? Looks like 1.2.3.2 was the latest Mission Planner version. So you go ahead and download this and install it on your system. It's already installed on my system, so I'll just leave that part up to you. It looks like this was just, updated 4 hours ago. Neat. So I'll probably get an update. So let's take a look. I'm going to close that out, come over into Mission Planner. One, 2, 2, 9. Oh, yep, there it is. Yes, I wish to update. I've already got the latest update, so I'm running version 1.2.32. Now, I did run into a problem earlier trying to connect. My settings came in as a default as COM7 and then 115K on the speed. It turns out that my port was set to 9600, so I'm going to drop this down to 9600 as well. I tried out a few different permutations. I tried upping the port to 115K, but that didn't work. So I dropped that back down to 9600, and it seemed to connect. So let's see what happens here. Okay, let's go ahead and connect. It should say timing out for just a second. But then boom, we're starting to grab Mavlink data. So what's happening right now is it's initiating a Mavlink session. Mavlink is a protocol that grabs all of the information and packetizes it, or packages it up so that it can be delivered to the ground station, where it can be parsed and then displayed on screen. What that raw data looks like is this. You're getting pitch attitudes, roll attitudes, things like that. So right now the board is just sitting. It's not connected to anything, but if you did everything right and you've got the firmware installed properly, you should see attitude changes. Now my board's backwards right now, so actually let me turn this around. I don't want to zap myself. So if I pitch this forward, now I haven't done any calibration, so there might be a little askew, but if I pitch forward, my horizon rises, which is what it's supposed to do. If I pitch up, horizon drops. If I roll right. Now, this is actually really funny because I fell into this trap. The artificial horizon, if I roll right, the artificial horizon should flip left. And if you think about this, if you're actually in the cockpit of the plane, this is what the horizon should look like. So if you're saying, hey, it's reversed, it's not. But I'm guilty of running into that problem too. If you're seeing this pitching right and the horizon tilts left, you're okay. So we're good. We've got a newly flashed controller with running 2.9 Megapirate 2.9 release candidate 5. I'm going to spend some time going through some of the basic configuration settings here, but we'll do that in a separate video. But just to give you a peek into what that's going to look like, once I get a lot more of the hardware installed, a lot of this will make more sense. So, we'll actually see some information coming out of radio calibration. We'll talk about flight modes and how to get those set up, what your fail-safe settings should look like. Let's see, how to enable some of the different hardware options. So, if you're running telemetry, if you're running a gimbal or voltage and current sensing. And I'll spend some time talking about the configs also. Some of this is actually new to me too, because of the new changes in 2.9. So I need some time to just brush up on what some of the new settings are. Off the bat, it looks like some of these defaults have changed. I see that stabilize yaw has come down to 4.5. This used to be at 6. Rate yaw is at 250. This used to be at 240. And some interesting things here. Okay, so yeah, looks good. Ardupilot level. This will be one of the first things that we do also. There is a new calibration feature. It's a live calibration. I forget what it's actually called, but for this, in this case, when we have all the hardware hooked up, the way that you calibrate the accelerometers, at least the old way anyway, you can just hit calibrate accelerometers, excuse me, and you should be all set. Now, I do know that there is a new way to do the accelerometer calibrations. I'll have to look at that and see if those changes made it to this. So yeah, looks like we're good. We've got a working controller, and I can get on with my build. If you have any questions, just go ahead and post them down below, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for more.